welcome you all to Trek Wars. Alright, today I have something different. So I'm going to do a comparative analysis on the Vor'cha-class cruiser and the Galaxy-class starship from the Federation. Now, instead of comparing these like real world to, let's say, battleships or cruisers or things on the ocean, I'm going to be looking at them as a comparable analysis as if they were battle tanks on the field. And I want to do a comparative analysis of them, seeing as that, in my opinion, I think that the Klingon Vor'cha-class cruiser behaves like the T-80 battle tank that the Russians use. And I believe that the Galaxy class would fit in the category of the United States Abram. Now, comparing these could take hours with all the details and graphs and information, so we're going to keep it pretty simple. So the T-80 we're going to be talking about is the mass-produced mid-level T-80, and then which is the Russian tank, which is on the bottom, and then the M1 Abrams is an American tank, and we'll be talking about the newest version of the M1 Abrams tank for the United States. Alright, so the photo of the comparative analysis is not the T-80 but the T-72, but they're pretty similar as far as performance-wise. The Russians do claim that it can go up to 70 miles an hour, which is debatable. So the T-80 can go up to 70 miles an hour. The T-72 goes to 60. The Abrams is 67. So if this is true, the T-80 is slightly faster than the Abrams. Now, the Russian tank is much lighter than the Abrams. The only advantage that you would really see on the T-80 is it does have a bigger gun. So it has 125 rather than 120 millimeter. So the Russian cannon is actually bigger than the counterpart, but the ammunition is more advanced in the Abrams. All right, so let's kind of think about the stats and let's kind of look and see what we got going on here. So the T-80, in my opinion, is just like, and I'm going to refer to it as the Vor'cha-class cruiser, and it's the Klingon cruiser that's seen during the Klingon Civil War, and it's also seen during Deep Space Nine. So this battleship was produced in huge numbers. So once the Klingon Civil War had taken place, a lot of ships were destroyed and they're replaced with this upgraded vessel. And so this upgraded vessel, there's a lot of things that the Klingons were thinking about. Number one is size, weaponry, and how much they can produce it and how expensive it's going to be. All right, so the Vor'cha-class cruiser, its armor is 0.34. It has a mass of 2,238,000. All right, and so its actual hull value, I mean the strength of how much damage that the hull can take before the ship explodes, is 860,769 terawatts of power. So depending on the torpedoes and the amount of disruptors that hit this ship is basically around an estimation of how strong the hull is. So the hull on this ship would have an arm rating of 0.34. So one of the really interesting things is that the T-72s, T-80s, T-90s use plate armor, and that plate armor is actually seen on the Klingon Vor'cha-class cruisers, bird of prey, cavorts. So if you look at this, you'll see that there's the actual hull of the starship itself, and when you zoom in and you take a look, like what's before you right now, you'll see those squares and triangles. Those are actual plate armor. So there's the actual hull of the ship, and then there's this armor plating that is placed on top of the ship to make it more durable. So what happens with this is as the ship fights and is attacked, and rather than the hull itself being wiped out, the plate armor will burn away first, leaving the ship undamaged to a certain extent. So this same kind of idea of plate armor is used by the Russian tanks, is used by Klingon starships. So when it comes to shield technology, the two ships are pretty similar. There's only a slight difference between the two. So we know that when it comes to shield generators, the technology in the shield generators of the Vor'cha-class cruiser is not second class. It's a top class shield generator. Now, the hull value of the ship for its size is very good. It's extremely good, actually. So we'll kind of talk about that here in just a second. I know we haven't really gone over the Galaxy class, but just to give you an understanding, the mass of the Vor'cha-class cruiser is literally half that of the Galaxy class, and the Galaxy class is only a few hundred point scale damage over the Vor'cha-class cruiser. So that tells you that this ship was designed for long-term engagements in battle. So what this means is the Vor'cha-class cruiser is designed to be in large-scale battles and conflicts and stay operational and be able to fight for a long period of time. This is why it has this armor that's all throughout the hull, is it's protecting those weapon assets so that they can stay in the fight longer than other ships can. So their ship can take pretty much more damage than an average ship of its size. The Vor'cha-class cruiser is able to hit outside of its weight limit, mostly because of its heavy offensive capabilities, but also its incredibly durable defenses. Its armor plating, as well as its powerful shields, gives it the opportunity to stay in the fight, even with ships 2 to 3 times its own size. Alright, so I'll take a minute to look at Trek Yards, and Trek Yards has a really good image of the ship's size, and you can see that it's very similar to the size of obviously an Excelsior class, and its length is similar to that to an Ambassador class. And you can see that when it comes to actual volume and size, the Enterprise D is much bigger than the Vor'cha-class cruiser. And okay, so obviously we can see there's a size difference. Now let's look at the crew. So the Enterprise needs a minimum crew of 1,000, and for an evacuation situation, the Enterprise could hold up to 15,000 people. Now you look at the Vor'cha-class cruiser, it has a max crew of 1,900. Now how much of that is actual troops versus the actual ship itself crew? I'm honestly not sure, but I would guess it's probably pretty similar, and the 900 is probably troops. Now, if you look at the mass, you can see that the Galaxy class is 4,500,000, and then obviously the Vor'cha-class cruiser is 2,238,000. It's almost half. All right, so we learned some of this. So we know it has a pretty decent sized crew. It's got powerful shields. We know it's got really good armor. And we know that the ship is smaller, and it does have advanced technology on it. But some things we need to talk about is this ship is actually very maneuverable. It's very fast, and it relies on its ability to move around. This is kind of similar to the T-80, which is, one of its major selling points is for a heavily armed tank. It's pretty fast. That's the same thing with the Vor'cha-class cruiser, or Vor'cha-class cruiser, is that it's a very fast capital class starship. Now, when it comes to subsystems, now we talk about like the T-80 tank and we talk about the Klingons, the Russian technology is almost two generations behind the Abrams. So when you talk about like thermals, and you talk about radio weaponry, so jamming technology and stuff, the T-80s, T-72s, and even the T-90s are not even at first or even second generation Abrams. And so the Klingons are in the same category. For whatever reason, they don't really pay that much attention to their secondary systems, so their sensors, tractor beams, long range, deep space sensors. They don't really care. They just put what is absolutely necessary to get the ship into the battle, and they can fight and perform, but they're not worried about it going around doing scientific missions. These things are not really a prime reason for the ship. Now, there are modules, and yes, one of these ships could be built with more advanced things, but they're not typically done that way. So these ships are actually bare bones. They have good shields, good armor, and they do carry good weapons. But all the other secondary systems are subpar. So one of the really strange things and surprising things is that obviously the Enterprise's hull value is 1,040,000. Its armor rating is 0.23. And if you compare that to the other ship, there's only a few 100-point difference with the hull value. Now the armor is 11-point difference. That's huge. So that means that the Klingon battleship can stay in a combat situation far longer than, let's say, a Galaxy-class starship can. Because once the shields go down, the Galaxy-class is going to take a lot more damage per every hit than this Vor'cha-class cruiser is going to. Okay, so let's kind of focus on the weapons now. So when we're talking about the Abrams versus the T-72, so the T-72, it has a 125 millimeter cannon, and obviously 120 millimeter for our Abrams. So it's a bigger gun that is on the T-72. Now, like I said, its ammunition is not as advanced. Its secondary systems are nowhere as close to advanced as the Abram classes. So let's just kind of like stop there for a second, and then let's analyze the Klingon weapons. Okay, so the standard Klingon weapon would be a disruptor. So Klingon disruptors are short-range weapons that hit for around 32,500. These are seen on Katangas. These are seen on birds of prey. They're short-range weapons, and they're not particularly very efficient when it comes to long-range combat. Now, the Vor'cha-class cruiser has a more advanced disruptor, which is going to hit for the same caliber of power, but they have the ability to shoot like a beam, just like a Federation phaser. Now at 32,500, now if you've seen the comparative analysis on other ships, you're not really that impressed with this, and I can understand why. But I want to show you that this weapon is not as feeble as you might think. So Federation starships of this time period basically have three possibilities for weapons, because if you're going to be a military class vessel or have military grade weaponry, by the standards of Starfleet and by other races like the Cardassians, Type 8, Type 9, and Type 10 phasers are what they consider to be military level. So Type 8 are obviously going to be your light starships. These are like your Mirandas and Constitutions. It's 13,750. And then your more advanced next generation starships are hitting for around 20,000. Now, the most advanced starships in the Federation fleet at the time, the Galaxies, the Nebulas, they are going to be using Type 10 phasers. So that's 65,000. Now, remember, we're not talking about Dominion era variants. We're not talking about the Sovereign. We're talking about the Klingon Civil War area. Those ships didn't exist at that time period. So I just want people to understand, when you do a comparative analysis and you think about that 32,500, that means that that weapon is in between the Type 9 and Type 10, but it's significantly stronger than the Type 9. It's almost like taking a Type 9 phaser and a Type 8 phaser and putting it together is what a Klingon disruptor is doing. Now, it's half the power of a Type 10 phaser. So obviously, Federation top of the class Abram tank is a much better weapon overall. Okay. So they are very reliant on disruptors. Now, this ship is using newer disruptor technology, so it has a KGDM-3. So it can fire a beam just like the Federation starships can. So it's a medium range rather than short range like the birds of prey are. That has 18 disruptors. Now, I want you to keep that number in mind till later. So 18 disruptors at 32,500. And the reason I'm saying that is a Federation Galaxy-class starship carries about 14 phaser emitters. So if a phaser emitter gets wiped out or damaged, the Galaxy-class has 14 of those weapons. So that means that obviously there are more weapon pods aboard the Klingon ship. So in a long-term fight, like we were discussing, this ship is going to be able to have more weapon systems that can get damaged and stay in a fight longer than the Galaxy class. Now, the Galaxy class as a race system is very advanced and very expensive. And when I say expensive, I'm talking about time it takes to create and technology and tools in order to use those systems. It's a very, very good weapon system. Now, the Klingons disruptors are a much more simpler weapon system, cheaper, easier to produce, and that's probably one of the reasons why it has more. But because of the lack of technology, it's not quite at the firing power or standards that you would see at the Federation. So the Vor'cha class has a weapon up its sleeve. It has a heavy disruptor, one heavy disruptor located in the front of the ship, and it is extraordinarily powerful. All right, so it uses a heavy spiral wave disruptor, and this heavy spiral wave disruptor is one of the most powerful weapons during this time period. All right, to give you an idea of how powerful this is, the disruptor, the heavy disruptor of the Klingon Empire is a medium-range weapon, and it can hit for 357,500. And it can fire about 4 to 5 times, typically 4, before it has to recharge. So it's going to deliver an output of 1,430,000 terawatts of damage to an enemy vessel. So this weapon is so powerful that it could have destroyed the Defiant if it had taken a few more shots. So when the Defiant shields were down, they couldn't. There's a point where they say they can't take any more shots. That the ship's gonna fall apart, and they'd take their shields down to beam over the Cardassian leaders. It just goes to tell you how unbelievably powerful this disruptor is. We see this disruptor one-shotting Dominion bug ships. We see this weapon absolutely obliterating Cardassian galores. This is honestly one of the most powerful weapons. And part of the reason why this ship has this hugely powerful weapon is because it's going to be taking on ships that are 2 and 3 times its size. And what it wants to do is it wants to use its advanced cloaking device, and it wants to decloak, and it wants to be able to take those capital class ships out or damage them so severely that they can't get their shields up and that it can eradicate them. So Klingons and Russians have very similar ideas. Wants a firepower on a fast vehicle, and they're not that concerned about the crew survivability. They're more concerned about bringing numbers and firepower. And the reason I'm saying this is the T-80 series, the T-70s, and the T-90s carry, for example, they carry their ammunition underneath where the crew is. So if you get hit there and the ammunition explodes, it blows up the top of the tank, kills the crew. This is a defect that they've known that they have, and they've kept it for whatever reason. A lot of other tanks keep their, for an example, the Abrams keeps its ammunition on the top, so if there is a blowout, it'll blow out and not kill the crew. This is a different doctrine, and this probably is a design that makes it cheaper. And the Klingons, obviously, as far as escape pods, some of their ships don't even have escape pods on them. Not all of them, some do, some don't, but they're not as concerned about the survivability of the crew as some of the other races are, for example, like the Federation. All right, so now we have an understanding of what the position is, what the design concepts are, and the ideas behind the Klingon ship. So the Vor'cha-class cruiser overall is a very good ship. In my opinion, its cloaking device, its heavy disruptor gives it an advantage over most starships. Now, in a long, drawn-out fight, because of this ship's armor and the fact it has so many powerful weapon modules, it can stay in a fight much longer than other starships. And it's bringing a lot more firepower than most other starships are as well, especially ships in its weight class. So the T-80 tank is a good war tank. it does have some limitations, but when you think about its price point and how expensive it is and its mobility, its weaponry compared to, let's say, the Abrams, which is a far more expensive machine with a lot more technology, you can see that it's actually a rather efficient fighting machine. So the Vor'cha-class cruiser, in my opinion, is very similar to the T-80 tank. It's got a lot of powerful firepower, it's maneuverable, but when it comes to the state-of-the-art, secondary systems, subsystems, it's very lacking in there. And also, as far as survivability goes for the crew, the plan is for this ship to stay in the fight for as long as possible and do as much damage to the enemy fleet as possible for as long as possible. And that's really its only purpose. Survivability is definitely higher on the Klingon ship than obviously a T-80 tank, but I would say that overall the armor system, the poor sensor systems, the price point, the size, the weight, the speed, they're all very similar. All right, so I'm going to do one more video. Unfortunately, this is just taking too long, so it's going to have to be a two-part series. I'm going to do my evaluation of the Galaxy class and how it's similar to the M1 Abrams. Same format. We'll see if you guys like it. If these videos do good, I'll do more like this. If they don't do well, these will be the only two. With that being said, thank you guys for watching, and remember, live long and prosper. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.